Now, your name is Dominic,
That's me.
and what's your last name?
S-O-N-D-Y.
Sondy?
Yes.
Okay, we are here today with Dominic Sondy. And usually what we do to start out with is just some background information. If you want to tell us about your parents, where you were born, what year.
Okay. Born in Detroit, 1922.
Okay.
And my parents, my father was from Italy and my mother was from Sicily.
Wow.
But my dad went into the Army in I think 17 or whenever.
Mm-hmm.
And he was part of the 32nd Division,
Okay.
126th Infantry Division. And he was at all 5 of the fronts, you know, during World War I.
Okay.
And I can tell one story about him that's kind of interesting. That he told me, he said they were in the trenches, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and a Fokker triplane, you know, with a red and white checkered wings, a paint job on the wing, 3-wing airplane,
Mm-hmm.
which was very rare. I mean, I think it was the only 3-wing airplane ever built.
Mm-hmm.
But Germans were, this one plane kept circling over and over and around the trenches, and he got pretty fed up with that. He said, hey, I don't want to hear any of this. So he picks up his Springfield, and one shot, he takes a shot at it, and he hit the propeller, and the plane landed. It was only flying about 30 feet off the ground, and it kept circling over and over him. So when he hit the propeller, the motor stopped, and the plane hit the ground about 100 yards from where he was, and 2 officers, one French and one British officer, they jumped out there and pulled this guy out of the plane and took him prisoner. And so I thought, well, that was probably the most interesting thing that happened to him in the Army.
Okay.
The only other thing that was interesting about him was that he had he wore 5.5 D shoes.
Is that really small or really big?
He would have been very small, which he was. He was only about 5'3".
Okay.
And when I was 12, I had the same size shoe as he did.
Right.
But the interesting thing about it was that the Army didn't have any shoes for him. So when a buddy of his went to Paris on a pass, he gave him some money. He said, get me a pair of shoes, 5.5 Ds.
Mm-hmm.
And he did, and the guy came back and gave him a pair of shoes that he had made while he was in...
They had to have them specifically made for him?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he wore those the rest of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think many, he told me a lot of stories, but, you know, they were the usual thing about combat, and a lot of pain and killing and that. But one thing other, when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my dad was shaving, and he didn't have an undershirt on, and he was standing there with just his pants on, you know, and he was shaving away, and I looked at his back, and he had all these little white marks all over his back. I said, what are those? He says, machine gun bullets. He and his buddy were pinned down by a German machine gun, and the shells were just low enough to burn his back, and it tore up his pack and his equipment. But he was just flat enough on the ground so that he didn't get hit.
Wow.
And he told me, he said, there's 16 of them. And I didn't have to count them all, I could see them all over his back. There actually were 16 little burn marks. And the only other thing that was interesting about his service was that he was at the usual front business, you know, where the Germans were one place and they were there, and there were some French artillerymen. And the French are notoriously bad as artillery people because they get too excited and they make all kinds of stupid mistakes.
Okay.
So my dad is he's on the ground again, flat on his stomach, and a shell bounced off of his helmet. Now this is a 75 millimeter shell, and I knew what 75 millimeter was, so later I just wanted to check on his story. And when we used to have silver dollars, which you probably remember when you were younger, we had, I mean silver $half, well, a $half is just about the size of that shell.
Okay.
And it made a groove in his helmet. And when he took his helmet off, all of his hair was in it. He took all his hair right off, and from here forward, he was bald. Now, this was unusual because he wasn't that old, you know. Here I am, I'm 85 and I still got my hair.
Oh, he was permanently, the hair never grew back?
Oh, no, it never grew back. Yeah, it just fell right off. The shock is what did it, and his hair never grew back. And I used to remember when I was a little kid, the kids used to ask me, how come your father's so old, you know? Their fathers were, you know, 25, 22, but my dad was about 35 by that time, and you'd think he was 50 because of he had the only hair he had was from the middle back. But I thought that was kind of interesting that he lost it because some artillerymen just didn't, you know, he had the range a little bit too low, you gotta pick it up, so it goes out farther. But anyhow, that was about the limit of his activity that would be interesting.
What did he do for a career?
Pardon?
What did he do for a career?
Well, he came back and, well, I'll tell you what he did before he went in the Army. He and his brother were in Cleveland, and they used to go into towns south of Cleveland, about up to the middle of the state. Every week they'd go, and they were paving roads with these red brick blocks, you know. You probably have seen these old, there they were, and he and his brother worked for a couple of years before he went in the Army, and that's what they did. They did all the towns from, I think he said Findlay north. Now Findlay is about a third of the way down, but they did all those towns. They put all those red brick streets in. That was what he did before that. But then when he got back from, by the way, there is one thing. He was a member of the GI, he was given the GI Bill. Most people don't know it, but the U.S. had a GI Bill in World War I. Everybody thinks
Yeah,
that,
I didn't know that.
yeah, well, nobody knows that except my dad. He told me that he went to school to learn how to be a motion picture projector operator. And he went to school and he passed the course, and he learned how to do what was supposed to be done and he got a job in a theater right near where he lived in Detroit.
Okay.
And he was happy as a clam, you know, just running a projector. And he said that my mother was very upset because she was alone in the house up to about 1 or 2 o'clock when the theater closed. So he quit that job, which was unfortunate because I know a little bit about the Detroit motion picture operators. They had at that time a very strong union, and he would have been very well set. Instead, he went to work for Ford in Dearborn in a machine shop, and he hated it because of the smoke, and he was always taking in all that smoke and fumes from foundry and all that stuff. It was he hated it, but he worked. That was the one job he had for 32 years.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
He worked for Ford, and he went back and that was until he died. He died in 52.
Okay. Did your mom work?
No, my mother. She was allergic to work. Everything was wrong. And, well, during the war, they were she worked in the intermediate school where I graduated. She was working in the kitchen. And she was constantly complaining that other women made more money than she did, and the hours weren't good. Chronic complainer. She was not a nice person.
Okay. So did your parents do okay during the Depression then when you were growing up?
No, he bought a house in northwest Detroit, which was just like farmland. It was all country, you know.
Okay.
From the 6 mile north, if you know anything about Detroit, 6 mile north was farmland, you know. And he built a house there, and we were right across from the University of Detroit.
Okay.
The University of Detroit was on the other side of Livernois Avenue, and my dad's house was the first block west of Livernois. And he had that house, and he was very proud of it. It was his whole life. he was put in rose bushes in the lawn and all that stuff, and he was so happy that he had it, and then when he lost it in the Depression, it just demoralized him. He didn't care anymore. The one thing he didn't want me to do was go into the service.
Okay.
And, you know, all my buddies, they volunteered, and most of them went to Air Corps. If they made the Air Corps, if they didn't, they went into other things. But he, I knew how he felt, because it would have killed him if something happened to me. You know, I was his only son. But actually, I waited until I was drafted, and I was in for 3 years.
Did you graduate then, like in 1940?
41.
41? And so a lot of your friends, they were thinking about joining the service when they graduated, or?
Well, you see, we knew eventually we were going to go into the service.
Okay.
And a lot of my buddies went in 1942. And I was alone, you know, as far as my friends being around, they were gone. But I didn't want to volunteer because it would have hurt my dad. I think he would have been very upset. But when I got drafted in 1943, he accepted it, and it was okay. He knew it, you know, he was drafted, so why couldn't it happen to me? You know? So he did get drafted. Rather, I did get drafted, and I was in the Army from April 1st, 1943 to January 19th, 1946.
Okay. So where did you go for training after you were drafted?
For me? Well, it's kind of interesting how I got into field artillery. The man interviewed me and told me that, well, first of all, he said, I told him, I said, well, I'm a photographer, which I was. I actually trained myself to be a pretty good photographer starting at 12. And I was as good a photographer as anybody was, because I was 21 when I went into service. I said, I'm a machinist. I said, I worked in machine shops and doing tool work. And I said, and then I did some drafting. When the war work came, I was working believe it or not, into a commercial art studio, which I just loved, because all these guys, 35 artists, they were doing automobile illustrations and book illustrations. Those were things in color, because at that time, 1941, 42, there wasn't much color, you know. Now we got color in the newspapers, which at that time was unheard of. But the idea was that I told him, I said, just don't put me any place where I have to have math. I said, math, I'm not good at. So he said, well, I'll put in an order for you for 2 weeks. If there's an opening there's a school that trained photographers in Oklahoma. And he said, if there's an opening, I'll get you in there. But there's only a 2-week limit. You can't, they won't hold it for longer than that. In other words, if they got an opening within 2 weeks, I'd go there. But then, what he did, he sent me to field artillery in California, at Camp Roberts. They were training, and everything was math. I mean, the whole fire direction, you had to have math. Everything you did was triangulation. I learned more about math there in the Army than I did when I was in school, because I never passed a math course in school. I flunked them all. And I wound up, there was one interesting thing that happened, in that I was still in Camp Roberts, and there was an order out for people to go into the Army Specialist Training Program, ASTP. Have you ever heard of that? Oh, you know about ASTP. Not many people do. Anyhow, they said that anybody who had any foreign language background, you know, could apply for this program.
Okay.
So, of Of course, I did.
What language did you learn from your parents?
Well, the Army actually sent me to Stanford University,
Oh,
but my home language was Italian.
okay.
So I had some Italian, but not anything very great. But what they wanted was for people who could talk to the natives. And see, at that time, all the war was in Africa. So they knew they were going to have to go through Sicily and go up the Italian boot and go north, because that's where the Germans were.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the interesting thing about it was that I was the only guy that had a high school education. All the rest of them were from Michigan, U of M, Western, Notre Dame.
Oh, okay.
These guys were all engineering, most of them were engineering students.
Mm-hmm.
But they thought, they used to tease me, they said, you'll never make it, you don't even have any college. Well, there was one other guy, his name was Andrew Tomo. His parents spoke Russian at home. He was from a wheat farm in Montana, and his parents never spoke English. All he knew was, when he went to school, he had a 6th grade education. In school, he learned English, but at home, they only spoke Russian.
Okay.
So what do you think, who do you think they picked for ASTP? Out of the 8 that were picked out of our 55-man barracks, 2 of us were the guys without any college.
Uh-huh.
So I was sent into it. That's when I went to Stanford.
Okay.
And I learned a lot about the area, and they called it area study, because we had to understand the country as well as talking to the people. That's what they wanted, were people, somebody could talk to the natives and get some kind of information from them. So I went to Stanford for 3 months, and I didn't know this, but they had 2 programs. One was a 6-month program, and one was a 3-month program. So I used to work like crazy trying to keep my grades up, because they told us, as your grades go, if your grades go down, you're out of here, you go to a line outfit. So I worked, and I was getting 90s and 80s. Then one time I got a 78 on a test.
Was it math
I
test?
said, oh boy, I'm gonna get kicked out of here. Of all things, that was Christmas Eve.
Uh-huh.
Christmas Eve, I'm on a train from San Francisco to Seattle. You know what it's like going across the Rocky Mountains? You look down 5,000 feet and you see, oh, there's a town. You look over here and there's rock going straight up. That whole train ride was like that all the way through the Rockies. And I said, God help us if we ever hit anything on the track. I said, the train will go right down it was scary. But good thing it was dark, because we went all night, and by the time we got to from San Francisco to Seattle, then when I got there, there was a truck that picked me up, brought me to the camp that I was going to be in, which was Fort Lewis. And there were 50,000 people in Fort Lewis.
Okay.
And I was in, again, an artillery outfit. It was an 8-inch howitzer outfit. And I got the training that went along with firing 8-inch guns. Okay? Now, the only interesting thing that I think happened there was, it had nothing to do with the Army. Being a photographer, first thing I went to was the craft shop.
Okay.
I wanted to know if they had any camera, developing film. Film was awful hard to get during the war. You couldn't just go to any drugstore and find any size you want. That was almost impossible. But I went there, and before I even looked at the dark room, I sat down next to a lady. She was a WAC, and we just looked at each other, and that was it. And we kept track of each other for 2.5 years, back and forth, right? She'd write females, and I was in England, I was in France, I was in Germany. And I sent her a letter and said, now, this is my home address in Detroit. I said, if you don't get any letters from me, write over there, write to my dad's house. Well, after I got discharged in January 19th of 1946. I didn't get any letters from her. They were gone. The last letter I got, I think, was November, because I got back in September, and then I was on duty at a camp in the northern part of Illinois, and Camp Grant, and I was on duty there because I didn't have enough discharge points.
Okay.
And I would go back almost every weekend on a train to my house, and I got no more letters from her, at least I thought. Well, after I got out, after I was discharged, I went to, first of all, I went to U of M because I wanted to be in their architecture program because I wanted to be a product designer.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to U of M, there was a girl sitting at a table, and she had all the paperwork, you know. This was for housing, this was for books, this was for all. And she sat there, and I said, I want to enroll in the architecture. She went crazy. She says, I've been here for 3 months. You're the first guy that's come up here to enter school. She says, you're the first one. And she starts giving me all the paperwork. She says, you went to Cass Tech, you don't have to take any entrance exam. No, none of that. I had it. But in the meantime, since I didn't have any letters from Ginny, I married somebody else, which was the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. She gave me 21 years of hell, but I couldn't get out of it anyhow. But then, after my dad died in '52, my mother hated my dad. She hated everybody, because they weren't like her. She thought that if people weren't like her, they were no good.
Okay.
So she was a real nutcase. I mean, terrible. Treated everybody the same, lousy. Anyhow, when he died, she took all of my dad's personal effects. He had his Army uniform. He had a bayonet. He still used the GI razor they gave him when he went in the Army. He used that razor till the day he died.
Wow.
And when he was gone, all of a sudden all these little things kept cropping up. And I was asking my mother, I says, what'd you do with all of his stuff? Oh, she said, I gave it away to Goodwill. I said, you can't do that. I says, why don't you ask me? I would have wanted his uniform and all of his Army stuff I would have kept.
Mm-hmm.
And he, well, when he died, then when she got rid of all that stuff, I found 3 of Jenny's letters.
Mm-hmm.
They were from November, December, January. I never saw them. So my mother, she did that on purpose because she hated the idea of me having a girlfriend.
That's too bad.
You see, when I tell you she's a nutcase, you can believe it. She was terrible.
So you didn't get her letters, so she probably just stopped writing to you because she thought that you weren't returning her letters.
Yeah, she thought I was still in, she had no idea where I was.
Mm-hmm.
But I told her after a certain time to send the letters to my home address, which she did. And I've even got one of the letters still. I got it on a wall with her picture that shows it's a V-mail, and it has her address, which the last letter I got from her said she was transferred to San Francisco because she was processing nurses for overseas. But there was one interesting thing that happened when we were at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Oh, in Washington. Okay.
Yeah. The only thing we could do is go walking around the training area, on a Saturday, we got a pass, if we both got a pass at once. And one time she said, how's the chow in your outfit? And I said, we got the worst slum burners from World War I. I said, they're terrible. I said, they can't cook anything. They ruin everything they cook. And she didn't say a word. And I said, but there's one thing that's really great. It's the bread. somehow we get fresh bread every morning, and it's the best tasting bread I ever tasted in my life. She didn't say a word. Then one time we were walking around, I was holding by her hand, and I looked and she had burns. I said, "What are the marks on your hands?" "Oh," she said, "they're burns." I said, "But you got them, you know, they're all over." She said, "Well, taking the bread out of the oven." She was the one that was making the bread.
She worked there? You didn't know that she worked there?
Pardon?
You didn't know that she worked there?
I didn't know what she did, see, but then when she told me, she never said a word about, you know, how I said. It was another time when we were walking around, and then she told me that she was, every day they pulled out thousands of loaves of bread. I mean, can you imagine making bread for 50,000 people? Oh, boy. Of course, I don't know how many, you know, there might have been 50 or 100 women in that group, but that was her, it was her outfit that was doing the bread making. But then I waited and waited. I did everything to try to find her after I got back. There's an outfit in St. Louis, it's called, it's, what do they call it now? It's the Servicemen's Records. Anything you want to know about anybody in the service, you write them. But they wouldn't tell me her address. But I knew that after the war, she probably went home, or
Right.
I had the feeling that she married somebody else. And then I found out later she was living in New Orleans. And, but I lost her, okay, and that was the end of it. But the one thing that's kind of interesting that I found out about her was that she lived in Richmond, Virginia, and I didn't have my brains in the right place. I should have gone. I could have jumped on a train from Detroit to Richmond. 6 hours, you know, $22. Makes me so damn mad I wasn't smart enough to figure it out. I should have gone to her mother, because her mother, she never mentioned her father. I don't know. Maybe there was a bad thing going there between her, but she told me that she lived in Richmond. I don't think she was born in Richmond. I think she was born someplace else, and then they moved to Richmond. But she lived there, and she had a younger brother. She said she had an 8-year-old brother. She never mentioned her father, but her brother and her mother she did. She did mention. But I lost her, and because of not being smart enough, I shouldn't have just assumed that she quit writing. I should have known that she might have been writing and not getting my letters. But that was the end of that. But the interesting thing that, I've got something here. My son, who was a Vietnam veteran,
Okay.
he wrote this book, and it's part of your program, this history program of the service. He wrote it for that. It's a terrible book, in my opinion, because it's not, it doesn't have any straight focus. First he's talking about his home life, and then he's talking about the Army, and then I don't know. The only thing good in there he said about me was that my home darkroom was better than the one he had in the Army. But he was a photographer, not because I taught him much, because he hated it. When he was a kid, he never wanted to work in a darkroom. But he looked very perplexed. What's the mystery?
Oh, no, I was looking at the pictures. They're interesting.
Yeah, he took a lot of pictures. The one picture that he had a lot of pride in was he had one taken with Nixon when he went there to check on the troops in Vietnam. It's in there, but I look back and say, well, he wrote a book, but it doesn't make sense to me. It's sort of disorganized,
Okay.
but He sells one of these once in a while. This is one of those publishing, self-publishing books where if he gets an order, he orders a book.
Okay.
And they mail it to him, and then he sells it someplace. In other words, he doesn't have a stack of them that he has to sell. They print the books up according to how many orders he has. But that's about the end of it. And when it comes to my own business in the service, there were two things that were kind of interesting that happened. One was after we went, when we were after the Bulge, we were heading straight to Berlin. And that Patton was driving us nuts. He was pushing us 25, 30 miles a day. We didn't have a chance to eat or sleep or do anything. Just go and get there. I guess he thought we wanted to get to Berlin before the Russians did.
Okay.
But instead, thank God Roosevelt had some sense. He stopped us before we got to within 93 kilometers of Berlin. And he turned us around and had us go south on the Autobahn, which ran northwest to southeast according to the wind, because the Autobahn was made for plane runways. That's what he designed them for. But he had the planes, but he didn't have any fuel to fly them. That's what ruined. Actually, I think of my Army career as I was just plain lucky. I got in at the tail end of the war. The Germans had nothing to fight with. They had no fuel.
Right.
They had nothing to eat. They had no ammunition, except once in a while we'd find a big pile of ammunition, but they didn't have gas to put in the trucks to deliver it. So, to me, I used to call it the Road March Army. You'd chase them like hell, and they're running as fast as they can to get away from you. But anyhow, when that happened, we went. When Roosevelt, what did he call it, the Potsdam Conference? But when Roosevelt, Stalin, and who was the French?
Churchill? Oh.
There was a Frenchman there. They all decided to stop us from going into Berlin.
Okay.
And then the Russians came in from the east, and they suffered 270,000 casualties. Now, casualties means a guy could have been wounded, but it doesn't mean that fatality. But they had that many casualties because they got into Berlin was a wreck. I mean, the 8th Air Force had leveled it. I mean, there was nothing left. It killed half the civilians, broke up all the houses and everything. So then, when the Russians got in there was nothing left for them to kill. I mean, but they did. Oh, believe me, they were brutal with the Germans. They hated them more than we did. And after we came back, because we weren't going to go into Berlin, we started going south on this Autobahn, which is just like our expressways today, except that there were places dug out in the forest where they'd have a plane sitting in there. So one time we stopped, and I saw this beautiful Dornier bomber, brand new, never even been, I don't think it had ever been shot at. And there was a kid guarding it, an MP kid. I said, I want to go up there and see if I can find the gun cameras, because all of the machine guns, they had cameras taking pictures of whatever they hit. And I wanted one of those cameras in the worst way. He says, don't go in there. I says, why not? He says, we don't know if it's booby trapped. If it is, you get killed. So I couldn't go looking for those cameras, because if I did, I'd go pull on something, a wire or something, and the place would blow up and I'd get killed. So he said, no, don't do that. Well, that was about Palm Sunday. Now, this was the craziest thing that ever happened in the war. Palm Sunday was spring day with misty, you know, a lot of misty stuff in the air. It wasn't clear sunshine, but it was sort of foggy. But anyhow, I'm standing by my truck. By the way, I was a radio operator, so that was my job, to listen to whatever came over on the truck, on the radio, truck radio. Okay, so I was next to this. Truck was here, and I was facing east, I guess, and I hear a whining hum, you know. I'm hearing it, and it's getting louder and louder. And I'm looking down, and there's a big shadow, a round shadow, with two things sticking out this way. I says, uh-oh, he's got me dead in his sights. If he just touches one of his guns, he'll hit the truck and me and blow everything up. And I don't know, I didn't know what to do about it. But I kept getting louder and louder, and then all of a sudden, vroom, he flew right over my head. He leveled off about 30 feet off the ground. It wasn't a German, it was a P-47. It was one of our planes. I figured, well, that idiot, didn't he know? You could tell what our truck was. It was a GI truck, it wasn't a German truck. Now, over about 100 feet away was what we called a Chicago piano outfit. Four 50 caliber machine guns on a little turntable thing, on a little tiny, it was nothing but a little platform, and it had automobile tires on it. I mean, the same size tires I had on my car at home. And these guys are watching him, and he zoomed over, he turned around, he came back, and he starts shooting at these guys, and they're mad as hell. They're getting out there and they're waving, hey, you know, they're waving. And he didn't pay any attention to him. So he swings around back and he comes by again. Now I hear what they do in all kinds of artillery. Set, ready, fire mission, you know. The guy jumps in the seat and he's cocking these 50 calibers and he's waiting for him. So the guy comes over and right over his head, and he gives them all four 50 caliber machine guns, fired them all at once. And I saw he hit him right in the air. I saw smoke starting to come out of the plane, and he goes about a mile or so, and I saw him jump out, and he bailed out, had his parachute, and he started to come down, you know, the chute open. Mm-hmm. I didn't think it would even open at that. It was very close to the ground, but the plane blew up. It hit the ground, and you know. So the wind, one chance out of a 360, the wind's blowing him exactly back to that gun plate. And he's coming. Now pretty soon he's about 150 feet from us, and he's up there, and the guys are yelling at him, hey, you crazy SOB, what the hell's the matter with you? What'd you shoot at us for? He said, I didn't recognize you. He said, well, we don't recognize you either. Bam, they hit him, and he starts spinning around with that on his parachute. And he landed right smack in front of the gun. I couldn't believe it. I mean, why didn't the wind blow him the other way? The other way, any place. But and he was deader than, oh boy, was he dead. I mean, they killed him. Oh. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, you know, I hope this war ends, because it was pretty close to Easter, which I don't know what, I think was in March that year. February, yeah, it was March. You know, Easter varies, it doesn't always come at the same time. But anyhow, that outfit, they had a liaison, non-commissioned officer. He'd come over, and wherever my radio truck was, my truck was the battalion commander's radio, and they're always gathering around and having conferences and talking about this, you know, and they're yelling about supplies and where they're going to go and what they're going to do and all that. And this one guy, he was a a very nice man. He was older than I was. I was only, what, 22 when I was in Europe. And he's asking me, he said, what did you do before you got in the Army? So I said, I used to take pictures. So I pulled out my wallet. I had a picture of my cousin's son, second cousin, I guess. And and he was a little guy, about 4 or 5 years old. I took a picture of him, and I had it in my wallet. And he says, he said, how did you do this? I said, well, I built my own enlarger. I built my own developing tanks. I said, when I was in the 7th grade, I put a sign up in the window, Rolls developed, black and white, of course, 39 cents, double-sized pictures. That's exactly what the Kroger store was charging down the street. So I said, no, I'll compete with them. And dozens of people brought me their pictures because they thought my dad was doing the developing.
Okay.
When they found out that I was a 13-year-old kid in the 8th grade, they quit bringing their films around.
Really?
But I never had a complaint.
Yeah.
All the pictures I did were good. You know, a lot of people at that time used to go to, where did they go? They went to Niagara Falls. One lady would bring me a roll of film. She and her husband went to Niagara Falls. I figured, well, what the heck? Then I developed another roll of film, and some more people went to Niagara Falls. I thought, yeah, what the heck is there over there that's so interesting? I never did figure it out. But anyhow, when they found out that this little kid was developing the films and making the prints, they quit bringing their film to me. That's life. But I only had one other experience that I think is worth mentioning. And, well, first of all, this guy used to talk to me because we had nothing to do but talk between us. And I swear I didn't even get his name. If I would have known that that whole outfit was going to be wiped out in a week, I would have had his home phone number and home address and all that, because I would have gone to see him after the war. And this guy, he says, wait a minute, he said, you tell me that you made your own enlarger? I said, yeah. He said, how'd you do that? I said, well, I made it out of scrap wood. And I took my camera and clamped it up there with a couple of springs and used the camera lens as an enlarger lens. And it took good pictures, it made good pictures. And he said, that's impossible. I said, not impossible. You saw the picture. Nothing wrong with it. No. He says, well, he said, what are you going to do after the war? I said, well, I'm going to go to Michigan or Michigan State or whatever and become a product designer. And he says, you know, he says, we need somebody like you in my town. I says, where's your town? He said, Upper New York State. And he said, what would you do? I said, well, I said, if I don't go to become a product designer, I will probably take pictures to make a living. He said, you know, he said, we don't even have a photography store in my own town. I said, well, I said, that takes a lot of money. I said, you know, I can't do it. He says, money? He says, don't worry about money. My dad is a banker, and he owns the town. He says, you don't have a thing to worry about money. He said, you come to, he told me, Spring something was the town. And he said, we need somebody like you. He said, you can take pictures, do all these mechanical things that, you know. He said, we don't have anybody that can do this. He said, so you can live in my town. So I thought, well, something to think about, you know. Well, about a week or two later, I only knew this guy about a month. And every day he'd drive his Jeep up, and we'd talk all the time when I wasn't answering the radio. And then one day, we lost them. They weren't around anymore. Now what they did, they found a woods or some forest or whatever, and there was a two-lane, two-track road going in there. See, their equipment was, you know, Jeeps could go any place. And these little light trailers, you know, they could go any place. They didn't have, our guns weighed 14 tons, and our tractors were 15 tons. So we wouldn't go in there, see. But anyhow, they did, and they got trapped in there, and they got wiped out, everybody. There were only 2 people somewhat alive when they found them. And one of them died on the way to the hospital, and the other one died after he got to the hospital. So all those guys that did that business with shooting at the P-47, they were all gone, and this guy never came back. We didn't have that outfit anymore, because after that, we were redirected to go to the Battle of the Bulge. Mm-hmm. So they turned us around and went north. Okay, but I remember them telling us that they got trapped in a woods because they were on a little 2-track road and they couldn't turn around. There wasn't any room to turn around. And I thought, well, it was a dumb thing. They should have gotten on some other road. You know, they shouldn't have taken that road. But they had maps, you know. They should have known that they were trapped in there. But okay, they're all gone. We lost. I think there was 450 men in that outfit.
Wow.
And not a one of them survived. Okay, now, we're doing the same thing. Our outfit, see, I was in an advanced party. The lead truck was the radio truck, and the colonel was sitting in the right front seat. Jin Wong, our blind truck driver, you know, he was a cook. But what do they do with him? They make him a driver, see, because he couldn't see worth a damn. And he was bumping into stuff all the time. So that's what the Army does, you know. If it's impossible or stupid, they put him as a driver. But, by the way, you ever go to the Cheyenne Chinese American restaurant in Chicago?
No, I didn't.
That was his. He started that. He won $1,800 in a poker game on the boat coming home. And then he started a restaurant. And then he got in with the Chinese people that were there. And they built this restaurant. God, it was a block square. I mean, it was a hell of a big restaurant.
Yeah.
And I used to go there. And I saw, he died in 1962. But the idea was, when he was driving, he did some stupid stuff that could have got us killed, but he didn't. Anyhow, our advance party was always way ahead of everything else. The guns were slow, and what we used to do is look for places to put the guns. In the spring, the ground is mushy, and you can't put a 14-ton gun in a swamp because it'll sink right down and never get it out. Anyhow, we were doing just exactly what we were supposed to be doing. We were round and round, and we were trying to find a place for the guns to be put. And we came up to a woods. There was a little 2-track road going in there. And we started to go into that road. And I jumped up, stop everybody, you know. I stopped the front truck, 5 trucks behind us, stopped. What's the matter with you? You know, whoa. I said, it's full of Germans. I said, they're in there. They said, how do you know? I smell cabbage. Now, when we stopped, our truck was about 30 feet from the entrance to the woods. And the wind was coming from a little bit from the left. And I smelled cabbage, and that's why I told everybody to stop. Only the Germans would be boiling cabbage, right? Okay. So then they are all asking me, what do you stop for, you know? I said, the Germans are in there. They said, how do you know? I said, cabbage. And they said, I don't smell anything. But the wind had stopped and then shifted. And all of a sudden, cabbage again. And all of them said, let's get out of here, you know. Let's get out of here fast. Because I know, you know, for some crazy reason, my stomach, it's like when you fly a plane. You feel when you're balanced. You know, you can be blackout, you can't see anything. But your stomach tells you when you're level or when you're to the left or the right. And my stomach told me, crowd's in there, get out, go back the other way, which we did. Now, it's a good thing, because the same thing would have happened to us as happened to that outfit, but we missed it. And then when I got back, when our outfit got joined up again, see, we used to go ahead, and then it would take about a day for the trucks to catch up to us. And then when they did catch up, we'd be in another 25 miles ahead. That's the way it was. And when Captain Beersdorf was our battalion commander, and Colonel Lockett, they were talking one time, and Beersdorf said, "You heard what Sondy did about the crowds for the cabbage?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "You go, what are we going to give them?" And one was saying Soldier's Medal, one's Bronze Star, and they were going back and forth. And they said, "Yeah, we'll put in the paperwork for it, you know." Okay. Now, they agreed that I was entitled to a medal, and what happened was, now this was about the middle of April, and you know, the war ended on May 5th, see. May 1st, the fighting stopped. May 5th, all the signing of the peace treaties and all that crap. Okay, so Captain Beersdorf and his driver, his name is Gay, G-A-Y-E, they got lost. We didn't know what happened to them. They didn't catch up to us, and about April 15th, they were gone. We didn't know where they were. But about, let's see, 28th or 29th of April, we got the word that they had been killed in their Jeep. They got shot up, and their Jeep went into a ditch, and it rained on them for 5 days. In Germany, when it rains in April, it rains. I mean, you know. So they were gone. And I didn't realize it, but I didn't care much about the medal at that time.
Right.
Because I figured, you know, I might be dead tomorrow. Who cares? It's not important. So then, May 1st, we were in Bavaria, a town called Bad Aibling, A-I-B-L-I-N-G. It's a little tiny tourist town, and it's about 30 miles, let's see, wait a minute, east of Munich.
Okay.
And we spent our occupation there because when the war stopped, we stayed right in that town. And of all things, a school was a place where they had us living in this. We just threw our bedrolls on the floor. It was a little elementary school, and all of us were there. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I said, what about that medal I was supposed to get? And my CO said, he says, I don't know if Captain Beersdorf put in the paperwork. He said, but I'll check on it. Well, when the war ended, nobody cared anymore. May 5th, everybody was thinking about coming home. Okay. Now, when I think it was about 4th of July, everybody was on pass. They went to Camp C, where King Ludwig's castle was. It was a big tourist thing. Everybody in the army went over there to visit. Berchtesgaden, you know, the place where Hitler had his eagle's nest way up on top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Well, I went up there and snitched a couple of fittings off of his the drapery hardware. You know, I wanted this. He had a beautiful blue swimming pool, but it had the air boys. They bombed it, so the tile was flying all over. So I picked up a piece of tile. I brought those two things back, but I lost them after a while. But anyhow, We never did find out if Beersdorf did put in that order. And after May 5th, oh, by the way, I took some of our radios in the camping area, and I strung up telephone wire between them. So I had about 5 radios all, and I had it tuned to BBC in London. They were talking about all the plans for, you know, for the concession of surrender of the Axis anyhow.
Okay.
And so I didn't bother with it anymore after that. Now, about a week or two later, on a Saturday, I wasn't eligible for a pass because I had one, I think, the week before. So everybody was gone. I mean, half of them, they were at King Ludwig's Castle. They used to take a truck over there, about 30, 40 miles. They used to drive over there just to see all this stuff. And the colonel came right to our room, our school room, and he said, pack up your stuff, you're out of here in 2 hours. I says, why? He said, well, you're going back to the States. I said, what for? He says, there's still a war with Japan, don't you remember? Yeah, okay, and what's that got to do with me? I said, don't send me. I said, they want 20 men? Find them someplace else, but let me stay, because I had applied for officer training.
Okay.
I hadn't mind going into southern France, and in 90 days I would have been a second lieutenant. So that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go home. But he said, I'm shipping you back to, you're going to a unit from Le Havre, and that was the town we came in. We came in from Le Havre when we came from England, and we went out from Le Havre on a troop ship. Okay, so when we went there, then on the way there, the only thing that I thought was funny was what happened to me. We're in a boxcar. There were a whole bunch of guys, and we're all headed for Le Havre because we're going to be retrained and sent to then we're going to go fight the Japanese. That's what they had in mind for me. Okay, so now we're going north in a 40 and 8. You know what a 40 and 8 is? Boxcar, wooden boxcars, same ones that my dad told me about in World War I. Wooden boxcars. They always smelled of horse manure because that's what 40 men and 8 horses. That's what the thing would carry. That's why they called them 40 and 8, and they all smelled pretty bad. So we're going north, and all of a sudden we come to the biggest darn railroad central I've ever seen. Thousands of tracks all going into the center, and it was Mannheim. I had no idea that Mannheim was the central, it was bigger than Berlin as far as transportation.
Okay.
Every truck, not truck, but every railroad car in the world seemed to meet up in Mannheim to go someplace else. So we're in Mannheim, and my boxcar was here, and there were 12 other guys. There were 13 of us in that boxcar. Now, right next door, there's a flat car, and there's an old man. He's about this tall, and he's got a little tiny pipe, and he's got a hat that has a lot of holes in it. He's got sunshine coming. It was an interesting picture. And there's a girl nursing a baby. She was about 17, 18. And she says, I wonder where these Americans are going. So he says, he's probably going back to America. So he said something, and I answered him in Italian. And he says, boy, are you lucky. Just think, you're an Italian soldier, and you're going to go to America, and you'll be happy, everything, you know, streets are paved with gold in America, you know. And I says, what are you talking about? I says, I'm an American soldier. He says, you don't have to kid us. He says, we won't tell anybody. He says, just us two. He says, why should we tell anybody? If you can get to America, God bless you. He's telling me this in Italian. And so I'm yelling back at him, what the hell are you talking about? You know, I'm not an Italian. He says, of course you are. He said, you got an American uniform. He said, you got in with them. He said, they don't know the difference. He says, they take you back. And this guy was driving me nuts. Now comes the part where our train, boop, boop, and the train would go forward and stop. Then back up. One toot for backing up, two for going forward. And both trains start doing it once. His little flat car, they're going like, and I'm yelling at him, I'm screaming, no, I'm not a deserter. You can't call me a deserter. And the guy says, look, you don't have to tell us. We won't tell anybody. You're so lucky. He says, look, he says, you're not an American. I said, what are you talking about? Of course I'm an American. He says, well, how come you speak Italian? I said, because the Army sent me to Stanford so I'd learn Italian. What's Stanford? I figured Dumbbell didn't even know what Stanford was. Well, so we're going back and forth, and it's the craziest thing I ever saw in my life. These two trains are going. Our train is pulling away, and I'm yelling at him, you know, I'm not a deserter. But before that happened, he looked at me, he says, you're not an American. He says, you got brown hair like me. Of course, he takes his hat off. He didn't have any hair. You know, he was 60 or 70 years old. I said, what do you mean? Brown hair like you? He says, you got brown hair. He says, the Americans, they're all blonde. And I looked in that damn boxcar, and 12 guys in there. I was the 13th. 12 of them had blonde hair. And I'm saying, this is crazy. I couldn't believe this. And anyhow, we're both screaming at each other, and he's telling me, buona fortuna, you know, good luck, you know, have a good time in America. You're so lucky you're going back with the American. And I never figured out how I couldn't have changed that man's mind for $1 million. It didn't make any sense to him. But actually, that's actually what happened. I thought that was the funniest thing that ever happened to me.
That is good.
Not many things were much fun over there, but that was one of them.
Okay, so we left off right where you were talking about being at the train station. So what happened from there? Did you take a ship back to the United States?
Oh, no. There weren't any jets at that time. This was before jets. No, I went back on a troop ship.
Okay.
And that's why they sent me to Rockford, because I didn't have enough discharge points to be discharged in September when I got there. Mm-hmm. And I was stationed at Camp Grant, and I had, just a routine, something just to keep me busy. But then what they did was, on January 19th, I had my 50 points in, and so then they discharged me.
So you were at Camp Rockford for how long then?
Camp Grant in Rockford, Illinois.
Oh, okay.
I was there from September to January.
So you got lucky and just didn't really have to ship out to the...
Pardon?
You just got lucky and didn't have to go to Japan or...
No, the war ended in August, see. I forgot to tell you that. When we were in this camp in Le Havre, the 25th of August was the Japanese sued for peace because they had dropped the atom bomb. Mm-hmm. See, we didn't know anything about the atom bomb. You know, that was we had no idea what was cooking over there.
Right.
But there is one thing though. Excuse me. It just slipped my mind real quick right now. There was something I wanted to tell you that happened.
Something about Japan or the bomb?
Pardon?
You were just talking about Japan or the bomb maybe?
Yeah, well, let's see. See, when we were in Le Havre, mm-hmm. we were at this camp. God, it was a huge temporary camp, and thousands of GIs were getting ready they were shipping us back to the States because, well, what I forgot to tell you was that when I think it was the 19th of August that the atom bomb was dropped in Japan. And then by the 25th, the Japanese sued for peace. And then we still kept the same schedule. We went back the same way we would have if we had to go to Japan, but instead of getting training for Japan, we just lived out our time until we got enough points to graduate. See, they had a 50 points. You had 2 points for every month overseas, and they had a schedule that I had 45 points when the war ended in Japan, and it was only a matter of time before. But I didn't, you know, those crazy guys in the Army, you think they ever do anything right? When I was training in Camp Roberts, we were getting desert training because Camp Roberts is desert. It's desert all over the place. But they were training us for Africa. But we didn't go to Africa. We went to England. We landed in Wales. And there was snow and cold. The coldest place in the world is England. You've got no idea how cold that place can be. It's terrible. You're just frozen into it. I'll tell you how dumb a thing I did. I had a brand new pair of shoes that they had fitted us with when we left camp, the camp near Boston. And then we got overseas and we landed in Wales. We went into the Midlands of England. And we were out there on some kind of a training exercise, and it was horrible, freezing cold. So I just shook some ashes out of it. They had little stoves over there about this big around, about that high. And you shake the coals that are hot, and they fall down below. And I just put my feet on there to try to get warm. I didn't know it, but my feet were so cold, I didn't feel that the shoes were ruined. I ruined both shoes, absolutely distorted, twisted shape because of the heat, and I still couldn't feel it. And poor sergeant, our supply sergeant, I tell him, I says, Flaherty, I says, give me a new pair of shoes. He said, what the hell did you do with the last pair I gave you? You know, 11 days ago we were in Massachusetts, and we got all new equipment. So he tells me. So I said, well, I ruined them. I said, take a look. He said, well, it'll take about 5 days. Well, anyhow, I got a new pair of shoes. But I'll tell you what the real tragedy of that war was. In the morning, what was he? They call it S3. He was the, I don't know the term for it, but anything to do with secret stuff, you know, about troop movements or anything like that. He comes over to me and he said, he takes off his binoculars and he puts them on me. He said, go down that road. He says, there's a hill and a place where it stops and you can't see anything. He says, we're expecting a big load of German tanks to come over there. He says, the minute you see them, turn around like hell and get back over here and let us know on the radio. I says, fine. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching. Nothing. The Germans never showed up. But what I did see was this lady who lived in there was a little house there right next to where my truck was, and she was watching me, everything I did. So I had some K ration, and there was a little can, a little thing about this big of coffee. I didn't have any way of getting any hot water, so I threw them. And she was watching. She jumps out there and she grabs it. She says, "Mister, is this coffee?" I said, "Yeah." Oh boy, she goes in the house. She probably never had coffee in 5 years, you know. So she goes in the house. now her husband comes out, and he does something very strange, except I knew, because I learned it in high school, about engines that work on methane, you know. He opens up the trunk. The trunk was not a long one like this, you know, it was almost straight down from the back. The window was right next to the, you know, right, the trunk was really only about this wide.
Okay.
But there's a round, like a stove in there. And he picks up the lid, he starts throwing twigs, leaves, dried grass, and he throws it in there. Now, I knew that what he was doing was loading up the fuel for his car. See, I knew that this was a methane-operated automobile. Nobody else. When I got back to the office, I said, hey, I said, I saw a guy start his car up after putting the fire in the truck, and they thought I was crazy. They said, you lost your mind. What are you talking about? Anyhow, so just like I said, he goes in there and he throws in a whole bunch of stuff, and he lights it up with a match, and he closes the lid, and then he waits. He goes in the house, and his wife is putting bedding and sheets and pots and pans, because they're going to get out of there. See? They think that because I'm there, their house is going to be damaged, or they're going to get killed. So they didn't know it, but nothing happened. So what the two of them did, the minute the fire had burned for maybe 5 minutes in that then he just backs up, turns around, they had all the stuff in the back seat, they took off, they're gone, see. So I said, well, fine, you know. Anyhow, the Germans didn't show up like they were supposed to. So when I got back there was only one other thing that you might be interested in. A buddy of mine who just died a couple of years ago, he calls me up on the radio. He says, Sondy, get over here. I said, what for? He says, I got a whole bunch of prisoners. I said, you idiot, you take prisoners, you're gonna stay up all night and watch them. I said, you know, that was our rule. Don't take prisoners. Just take them someplace and let somebody else deal with them. Because if we took them, we'd have to watch them. You got to stay up all night and stay awake. Hey, you can't do that. That'll, you know, you'll fall asleep eventually, and then they jump on you and they kill you. So he comes driving up in his, I don't know whose Jeep he got. He got somebody else's Jeep, and he says, got a whole bunch of prisoners. I says, where? He said, over here. And so we drive over there, and I look at these people. They're tall, slender. The women, they were about your size, you know, tall and thin. And they've got a queue in the back, one big hair braid, one big braid going down their back. And the men had the same thing. And the people are terrified, because Al was threatening them. He's going to take them all prisoner. They don't know what the heck to do. There were kids there. So then when I got there, I had the interpreter with me, and he was talking to these people, and he says, you know, he says, these people, he says, they're not Germans. I said, of course not. I said, they look Chinese. I says, look in the back. It says SU, Soviet Union. They were Russians, and they came from a province that was way. It isn't even. There isn't any name for it anymore, but it was between Russia and China, and they were called White Russians, and these people were prisoners who were working in this factory. See, now the factory, we didn't know what they made, so a little guy comes out. He's sort of a dwarf, you know. He had a large head, and big hands, and short arms. He was somewhat of a dwarf, and he comes out. And he's got a big pole with about 10 pairs of shoes on it, and he looks down at me. And he takes off the side paratroop boots. Those boots were worth $500 if he could. So I had him, and he figured that was my size. And so I said, "No, you're crazy." I said, "These people aren't." I said, "They're Soviet Union." And they all start saying, yeah, SU, Soviet, SU. And then, of course, Al realized that these people weren't Germans at all. But what the hell was he gonna do with all these people? Women, men, kids, they were all working in this shoe factory. And the minute the war was over, they were gonna go home. Now, here's the thing. There was one girl, kind of tall, thin, and she comes up to me, and she gives me a ring, little tiny cameo ring, a black figure of a woman's head on a white background. That ring must have been 100 years old because it was all worn down, And she gave it to me, and I said, no. I said, I don't want. And then she was hurt that I wouldn't accept the gift, And so Huffer, he told me, he says, Dumbbell, he says, take the ring. He says, she'll feel insulted if you don't take it. She wants to thank you because you kept that idiot from arresting all of them and putting them in a prison camp. And they were happy as could be. I mean, they were going to go, and there was a railroad train there, and track. So that there was a train, and they were going to get taken back to White Russia. I forgot the name of that province. I learned it in high school, and I'll be darned if I could remember it now.
Not Manchuria, is it?
No, Manchuria is way north. That's up in the Chinese part. This was a state bordering on the Balkans. It was between Russia and China. There was one province in there that these people were from, and that's where they were going to go back because they were going to go by train. Okay, now I took that ring, and when I got home, I gave it to my sister. And my sister, she never took it off, and she got killed in a car accident 3 years ago. And to this day, I called up the police, the chief down there. I says, did you have anything that my sister got, like her watch or ring? He says, nothing was saved. She was pretty bad, smashed up. Anyhow, but that ring, I know it meant so much to that woman, and she wanted me to have it. I took it. I gave it to my sister. But the worst part of it, about 3 days later, in the Stars and Stripes, they used to come around and drop off copies. And they said that these people, this whole group from this small town, they started to go back. They were going to go east, where they had to go. And there was a tank car that was filled with alcohol. So they had a celebration. They drank, and it was all wood alcohol. Killed them all, even the kids.
Yeah, the kids drank it too.
That's what happened. So that nice lady with the dark brown hair and on her back, she was gone too. Even the kids got it. They gave over there that they don't. Kids drink. They don't feel that it's terrible to give a kid a drink. But so they drank too, and so all of those people, Stars and Stripes said that the whole group of them all died because they didn't know it was wood alcohol. That's war. That's tough.
So after you came back and you got discharged, then you went to the University of Michigan? No? Where did you go?
Wayne
Oh, you went to Wayne State?
Yeah, but it wasn't Wayne State at that time. It was just plain old Wayne.
Wayne College?
Yeah.
Okay, and then did you get a bachelor's degree there?
I've got a bachelor's and a master's in teaching.
Okay.
I taught for 32 years.
And you taught, was it art classes? Did you do that in Muskegon or
Well,
even?
the first art job I had was in Wayne, Michigan.
Mhm.
I taught 2 years there. Then I moved into Detroit. I moved to Roseville, but I was teaching in Detroit.
Mhm.
I taught in a elementary school for 2 years. Then they transferred me to a high school because to teach. I was one of the 5 teachers in Wayne County that had a full-time photography class.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I taught. I taught photography for 5 years. And in 1960, I got a leave of absence because a friend of mine wanted me to work with him taking school pictures, you know, the little envelopes that you get in elementary school. Well, I spent 2 years with that guy, and after I found out that he had no intention of ever paying me anything, one time I was somewhere near Flint. It was out in the country. Fortunately, it was good weather, and he wouldn't give me even motel, you know, tourist cabin. You could rent a tourist cabin camp for $6 back in those days, and he wouldn't even pay that. So my working for him was in very short supply, right? Because here's what he did. He hired me because he wanted me to develop a lab that would fit into a truck. In other words, put a generator up on top, gasoline generator. It would make enough electricity to pump water for developing film and all that. And I actually drew the thing up the way it would have to be in a truck. And his family knew a retired engineer, and he asked this man if it was possible to design it or to build it the way I drew it up. And he says, yeah. He said, it'll work. He said, it'll work fine. Because I went through the whole process. A storage tank for water, another tank for wastewater after it's used, and then one side of the truck was for developing film, and the other side was a place to develop all the prints. See, and then they put them all in those little envelopes for 2.5, and you get 16 pictures of your kid. That's what we did. But anyhow, he had me shoot the medical school at U of M.
Okay.
So I go in there, and some of these guys are very arrogant. I mean, they figured, who the hell are you to tell me what to do? Because the guy would come in there and he'd do this. And I said, what are you doing? I said, I'm not going to take a picture of you like that. Well, that's the way I want it. I said, no, you won't get it here. Oh, God, I had a fight with 2 or 3 of those guys. They were terrible. You know, I don't know what they tried to do, but it wasn't funny. So then, the next day, he has the film developed, and there's not one picture. You know why? See, the film has a natural curl. If it's on a spool, this big around, and then it goes this way. The inside of the emulsion side is on the inside of the curl. So he decided to do it the opposite because it was easier to load into a camera. So that means that the back of the film was where the picture was supposed to be, and he lost every one of them. And he begged me to go there the next day and shoot them over again. I said, do you think I'm going to go there and face those guys? They'll think that I screwed up.
Yeah.
And you know, I never worked for him again.
Right.
And he never paid me for anything either. So as a result of that stupid leave of absence, I couldn't get back into Detroit, so I went to work for another school system. I worked for Warren, Michigan. But I made a lot of dumb mistakes. I trusted him, for one thing. But, well, I've had some pretty good success and some not so good success. But I can't complain. I got out without getting hurt, you know. I could have been crippled or legs off or arms off. Very lucky. Lucky that we got in at the tail end of the war.
Yeah. Do you have any other stories that you wanted to tell?
I think I covered them all. I've been
Okay.
thinking I've been thinking of what you'd be interested in, and I had no idea how it could